Okay, NVIDIA has smashed their earnings, massive interest coming into this earnings report, obviously, because we've been talking about NVIDIA. They've had a massive run up. What is the ramification going to be in terms of for the industry, competition? Is this peak NVIDIA or is the peak yet to come?
Well, I think it's peak in one way, but this is less about a commentary on NVIDIA because they're clearly firing on all cylinders. But, it's a pretty well established rule in capitalism, which is when the market observes that there's a company just printing enormous revenues and profits, they want to compete with them naturally to get their share of those revenues and profits. And that typically happens in all markets. And the result of that are just decaying margins. In the absence of a monopoly, this is what you should expect. And so because in this market, there's nothing really monopolistic about what they do. What they do is exceptional and good, but there are other ways and other systems and other companies that are developing chipsets and capabilities here to compete with NVIDIA. So it probably just motivates them even more and accelerates the path where you see competition. I tweeted this out yesterday, but one of the most interesting things that could happen is somebody like Tesla decides to either open source their chip or actually starts to sell their platform. Because if FSD gets to a reasonable level of scale, that entire platform system is a learning and inference system for the physical world. And I think that has tremendous applications. You have something called RISC-V, which is an open architecture spec to essentially compete and create different versions of different chips. That has implications more, I think, to ARM. You have companies like Google that, frankly, spun their own silicon a long time ago, TPU. You have Amazon now talking about doing the same thing. Microsoft has invested a lot of money in FPGA technology. So it's just yet another accelerant in this trend to create many forms of AI-enabled silicon. And so I think that sort of, it pulls that reality forward. And I think we're going to have to figure out when the market prices that in, because I think that probably decays the NVIDIA margin and upside over time. Again, that is not a commentary on them. That's just a market reality.
Yeah, margins get competed away. For folks who don't know, Tesla is making something called Dojo. It's their own supercomputer. Here's a picture of it. They showed that at Tesla AI Day last year. And you have ARM's open source competitor is the RISC-V chip you're talking about. It's an open source architecture for doing large jobs. And so I guess my question to you, Friedberg, is if you look at all this capacity coming online, do you think we're going to be in a situation where the amount of capacity, compute being put online, is going to outstrip the need for that compute because software is getting so much better? And then maybe people are running Hugging Face jobs and various LMs on the new silicon from Apple, and they're running it on their M2s. And so do we need this much capacity? Are there enough interesting jobs in the world for all this capacity? And then might that also be a headwind against NVIDIA when people say, I got enough capacity here?
I think the rational way to think about this is to try and calculate the efficient frontier on compute use. So the more compute you use, the more it costs you. The question then is, if you double the amount of compute you're using for a particular application, do you get twice the return on the investment? If you triple it, does your ROI on a percentage basis, go up or go down? So at some point, you reach an efficient frontier, which is you start to see a declining or negative rate of return on the investment in the compute that you're using for a particular application. And this is certainly going to be application and market specific. It's going to be largely driven by the data that is available in that market to do training, to do tuning, the market's appetite to spend money for that particular set of applications that emerges from that compute that's being used. And so we don't know today where the efficient frontier is across each of these different markets and sets of applications. And the market is finding that out. In the process of finding that out, everyone is spending a shit ton of money on compute. And they are trying to get as many server racks as they can. They are trying to get as many chipsets as they can. They're trying to get as much server time as they can. And everyone's got this idea that the more compute I can throw at a problem, the return is going to scale linearly. And it turns out that, like with most things, the answer is likely not. So we're at this point right now in, I would argue, a bit of a cycle that there looks to be a bubble. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of inefficient spending going on as the efficient frontiers are discovered across all these different application sets. And so my intuition, without a lot of actual data to back this up, is that based just anecdotally on what I'm hearing people doing in the market, what companies are doing, what startups are doing, et cetera, everyone is throwing everything they can at compute, and they're going to realize that they're going to need to rationalize those expenses at some point. So I would envision NVIDIA is probably riding a little bit of a discovery of the efficient frontier wave right now, and that this probably is not necessarily steady state.
Sachs, we experienced this before, as you remember from the dot-com era. There was a massive investment, very similar to this, in fiber, and the overspending of building the fiber infrastructure so everybody could get broadband and they could stream movies, et cetera, happened in that 97 to 2002 time period. A lot of those companies went out of business. A lot of that fiber never got used. People were working on compression algorithms while they were building out massive fiber, and a lot of that fiber got sold. I think Google bought up a lot of it. Other people bought it up. And it was just a massive overspend. So is this like the dark fiber of this era where we're just going to build so much capacity that there's just going to be not enough jobs to run on it in your mind?
Well, I think it's a little different than fiber in the sense that every year there's going to be a new generation of chips. And so these cloud providers who are providing GPU compute, they're going to want to keep upgrading the chips to be able to address the next generation of applications. So I don't think it's quite as static as fiber where you kind of build it once. And you're right that there was kind of a glut of capacity that was created. Eventually, though, the internet usage grew into that capacity. But I think this is a little different because, again, you're going to need to upgrade the chips every year or two. I think Freeberg is right that this is clearly a spike in demand that may not be sustainable. I mean, recall what happened here is that ChatGPT launched on November 30th last year and really caught everyone by surprise. It kind of took the world by storm. And over the next few months, you had hundreds of millions of users discover AI. I think it surprised even the OpenAI team. I think when they launched ChatGPT, they thought it'd be more of a proof of concept, but it ended up being a lot more than that. And so everyone has scrambled all of a sudden in the last 9 months or so to develop their own AI strategy. And so, again, it was this giant platform shift that happened overnight. So there is a tremendous GPU shortage right now. And that's also what's leading to these almost software-like profit margins by NVIDIA. Because when everyone's clamoring to get a limited supply of these chips and there just aren't enough, NVIDIA can almost charge whatever they want. And so I think even more than the demand, the profit margins might not be sustainable. But I think the reality is we just don't know what the steady state of demand in this market's going to be. I think we can say that it can't continue at these growth rates, but probably there will be some steady state of demand that's, it probably is at least where we are today.
Yeah, I don't think it's perfectly analogous, Chamath, but just to bring up some historical context, check out this article I was reading the other day. The dimensions of the collapse of the telecommunications industry. This is August 2002. And it says, the dimension of the collapse in the telecommunications industry during the past 2 years have been staggering. 500,000 people have lost their jobs. In that time, the Dow Jones Communication Technology Index has dropped 86%, the Wireless Communication Index 89%. These are declines in value worthy of comparison to the Great Crash of 1929. Out of the $7 trillion decline in the stock market since its peak, about $2 trillion have disappeared in the capitalization of telecom companies. 23 telecom companies have gone bankrupt in a wave capped off by the July 21st collapse of WorldCom, the single largest bankruptcy in American history. So just a little history there of this. It's not perfectly analogous. Obviously, NVIDIA is not going bankrupt or anything like that, but this overcapacity issue is definitely going to be something. But you had mentioned that in one of your tweet storms in the past couple of weeks, or these long form that you're doing on X, previously known as Twitter, you mentioned that what are the jobs that could be pushed to this compute? And what if one of them works? I think you were doing a speaking gig that somebody tweeted out a little clip of. So let's unpack that. What do you think are some jobs that people might push here that we don't anticipate that could solve something miraculous in the world?
Well, the framing is really like if you go back to like the gold rush of the 1800s in San Francisco, the people that made the money were the platform enablers, right? They were the ones that sold the picks, the shovels, the pans, and the jeans, right? And that's where Levi Strauss was born. The equivalence in that analogy today is NVIDIA, because they are the dominant pick and shovel provider. So the question is, well, what are we going to use these picks and shovels to create? Are we going to find gold? And I think the question is unclear. And where will that gold be found? Will it be found inside of a big tech company, or will it be found inside of a startup?